some of the people.
Okay.
I don't know.
I'm going to start us, and I think that we're all going to be able to see each other. Welcome to our Google Hangout for the Ithaca City School District. Today we are focusing on the inclusive classroom, focusing on teaching children with autism. My name is Liddy Coyle, and I'm a master educator in the school district. I want to welcome all the people that are on our panel that you'll see across the bottom there, and they're going to introduce themselves in a moment. I would like to let anyone who is viewing live know how to comment during our broadcast. You can comment if you're watching on YouTube underneath the video. If you're out of full screen, you can just add a comment. I will try and check those. Also, if you're watching on the Google community page, you can add a comment in the Share What's New section. Our sort of loose learning target for today is, if you're thinking in terms of learning targets, I can use this information from today's panelists to reflect on my current inclusive teaching practices. Just a reminder to anyone that is on our panel or that is going to share a comment, perhaps, we're going to use people first language, where we speak about the person first as opposed to a characteristic or a disability. So instead of an autistic student, we're going to be speaking about students with autism. We're also going to speak in generalities because we really want to respect confidentiality. So we just are going to remember that as we go, and if we do start to head down a road that might be too identifying, I might ask us to get a little more general because we want to be very careful about that. We are very grateful for our panelists' expertise. I'm going to give a little disclaimer for all of us is that anyone watching, we don't know your children, and every child is different, and we're going to start with that in our discussion. But we want to be sure that any teachers watching this know that you need to work with your service providers, the students, and the families to develop the most inclusive practices for that student. So any of our examples are things that you should discuss with other people to be sure they fit the student that you're working with. So that being said, I would love for our panelists to please introduce themselves. If you just say who you are, where you work, and what your role is. So Lydia, you want to go first?
My name is Lydia Dolch, and I am currently at Fall Creek Elementary in Ithaca, New York, and I work co-teaching in the 5th grade. There are quite a few kids on the spectrum in the 5th grade, including 2 kids with pretty intensive autism who are functionally nonverbal.
Thanks. Rachel, you want to go?
Hi, I'm Rachel Panosian. I'm a special ed teacher at Beverly J. Martin. I'm the lead teacher of the primary autism classroom. We currently have 5 students who all have autism, 4 kindergarten and 1 is 1st grade, but we can go up to 2nd grade. The students have a lot of varying levels where they are on the spectrum, and we also have 3 TAs that work in the room, and Rebecca, who I guess can introduce herself as well. So.
Great. Okay, Rebecca.
I'm Rebecca. I am the speech-language pathologist in the Open Doors room, also known as the primary autism room, but we call it the Open Doors room. And I work closely with Rachel and all the students in back.
Great. Nicole, do you want to go?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicole Doria, and I currently work at Northeast Elementary School on a part-time basis. And none of the students I work with at Northeast have autism, but I also do early intervention services right now through the county, and some of the students that I work with in this capacity have autism.
Great. Thank you to you all. It looks like we've lost Rachel momentarily, so hopefully we're gonna get her back on. But oh, there she is.
Got it. Sorry, I don't know. I just got kicked out.
That happens. We'll keep on going. So we're gonna start where our first part of our discussion. I'm just gonna start thinking about the fact that every child is an individual with individual strengths and needs. Autism can affect people in a myriad of ways, and the autism spectrum disorders and autism are characterized by some commonalities, although there are many differences. So we're going to just start with a general question, and we're going to ask Rachel to start by taking a stab at that. What is autism?
Well, autism is a developmental disorder that's primarily affects the brain, and the parts of the brain that are affected have to do with sensory issues, social communication, social and communication. It can it's on a spectrum though, which is the important thing to remember. So there are some students with or children with autism that function at a very high level, and then there are some students that have a lot more difficulties with their communication and with their social interactions and their sensory needs. It can look like, if it's a high functioning student, they could pretty much seem like a typical student or a child, and they could have just some frustrations around routines and being able to be in rooms that are really crowded, or they want things done a certain way. If a child is more severe on the spectrum, it could be something like the child has a lot of difficulty being in a room that's highly lit, difficulty using any verbal communication, difficulty with what we call apraxia, which is they know what they want to say or do, but have a difficult time getting their body or their mouth to do what they need to do. So it can be on a large spectrum with that.
Great. Thanks. Anyone else in our panel want to add any pieces to that? I thought that was a really great description.
I think it's critical to remember that autism shows up, like we've been saying, in many different ways. And so you might say, like, oh, all people with autism need only visual cues. Well, that's often the case, but as we'll talk about later on, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And so the way that it is expressed through each individual is the way that people are expressed through our own individuality. And so it's just really critical to have that lens as we talk about kids with autism and as we live in a world with more and more people with autism.
Thank you. Okay. Any other additions to that general description? Okay, I think we'll then move on with that beginning description. Let's get into some practical supports. Rebecca, I'd love for you to start us off with a discussion about classroom structures or supports that have been successful for students with autism, things like visual schedules, So if you start us off, Rebecca, and we'll just talk about different supports we've worked on.
Sure. Again, this is a general information, just like Lydia said, it's pretty much what we use in general. Every student is their own individual. This is not always going to work for everyone. This is not a be-all, end-all. It's just some things that we have found that work. So support should be concrete and visual in nature, mostly. Following schedules, either or a picture schedule, is helpful for students to anticipate what comes next. First and foremost, getting to know your student is really important. You can get a better idea of what might work for him or her as an individual, and the hard part a lot of times with students with autism is getting to know them and how long it actually takes. So even if it's taking a long time to establish that rapport, just keep at it, and because once eventually you have that student trusting you, that's imperative to the success of the rest of your year. So just something to keep in mind. Insofar as visual aids, there are many different kinds. Pictures, whiteboards, visual schedule, transition cards, that kind of thing. And that can be for students of all levels. For instance, we have some students who are readers, and so when we started out the year, we realized that we knew their reading level. We started their visual schedule with words of what they were doing. So first it would be like, let's see if you can see this, breakfast, and then you'd have speech, and then they would go down that they would check and see what's next and what's next. And they would pull off their little tabs of what was next, and when it was done, they'd either match it to something else or they would be done with it and they would put it away. You can use symbols for pictures. So breakfast could look like that for children who are able to understand that abstract piece of it, that it is not necessarily their breakfast, but it is a picture of breakfast. And then there are, real photos that for kids who have a harder time with the abstract and really need to see what it is, who it is they're going to, and what it is they're doing. So those are just some examples of what we would use on a visual schedule. Another important thing would be a transition card. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to jump in and say one really cool thing that if you hold up like that breakfast card again, that we've learned is to cut away at pictures so the kids start learning to recognize the text. And so you're fading the picture prompt to show the text. Cut away pieces of the plate and then pieces of the glass until finally just the word breakfast is left. So for folks, especially as they're getting older and progressing, from primary into intermediate, helping them figure out how to fade to just written prompts can be helpful. That's just an easy way to do it with scissors.
Okay, thanks for that, Lydia. So another, a simple way of thinking about a visual aid would be a whiteboard, which is really easy, just something that you might have in your classroom or in your house. We have a student who will get very anxious unless he can read what his choices are, or he can read what's going to happen next, or he can write it himself. That also empowers him to make the choice and to be able to take the time to process what is going on. So those are just some examples. There's a lot of times there's an anxiety piece, especially with students that have a lower communication level. We have a student who really needs to have a schedule and really needs to see what's going on. Otherwise, the anxiety of not knowing what's next really takes over. So just trying to think about, what your individual student might need. There are many different kinds of ways of doing, the picture exchange system. We've got a choice board here, which is something you can do. There's sentence strips. There's like a ton of different things to do with it. It really depends on the level, and really the idea is the more empowerment and the more communication you can give a student, the more successful they will be, and really the more comfortable and relaxed and really just how happy they will be in order to be able to communicate as much as they can. So that's just something to keep in mind. Another practical, general info on practical supports would be sensory needs. A lot of students who have autism do benefit from a sensory diet throughout the day. This could mean being able to desensitize them in their body, or it could mean to increase a sensitivity depending on their mood, depending what's going on with their body. So we're talking anywhere from, some students can benefit from like a fidget while doing work, which is like maybe a little Lego in their palm that helps them concentrate while they're writing, or low lighting in the room helps them. When they feel, they're getting stressed out, you just lower the lighting and that instantly calms their body. Some students may require sensory breaks throughout a work session.
Oops.
Oh, keep going.
Oh, you there? Good.
Jumping, the proprioception piece of it, knowing where their body is in space, that's helpful for them. We do an obstacle course in the morning to stimulate sensory arousal for those kids who just drag into school. Consulting with an OT for sensory needs is something that's really important, and that's something that, hopefully your student will be able to have access to the OT and what they can provide. So stories at school and at home, creating social stories, using pictures that are familiar if you can get them. That's always helpful, something that a student will know in the school or at home. If you're writing for a child, you need to write from the first person perspective. For instance, I will try and wait until it's daytime before I get up in the morning. If you're writing for a young adult or an adult, you're really going to be wanting to use a third person perspective, they, he, she, accordingly. A good resource for that is the Social Stories picture book by Jed Ashton. He also has one for children and one for young adults. And social stories, again, are a really good way to get students to relate what is going on in their environment or rules that they don't understand to themselves. And that's a hard thing with children with autism, is understanding why it affects them, where they are in the process, what's going on with them. Another practical support would be a food reinforcer. There's an article by John Hamilton called "The Human Voice May Not Spark Pleasure in Children with Autism," and it cited a report in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The Stanford University School of Medicine conducted a study, and they found that in neurotypical children there was a strong connection in the brain between areas that respond to the human voice and areas that release the feel-good chemical dopamine. Okay, and the study found that that same connection is reduced in children with autism. So that means to us that if we're just telling students, oh, good job, they're not necessarily going to respond in a way that will motivate them because we're saying it. The connection that's reduced in children with autism can result in a lack of motivation. Using food rewards to increase the motivation is something that's really going to help them. So that is also backed up by this study, which is really important. Sometimes people see you using food rewards they don't understand, so it's something good to know. And the last thing I want to talk about quickly is downtime. Really never underestimate the power of downtime. Consider the challenges of your student that you think you know, and then consider the challenges that you probably don't know. That's something, especially with children who are lower in the communication functionality, are nonverbal, or have a hard time communicating expressively. Creating a low sensory atmosphere could be beneficial, and each student's different, and that's why it's important to take time to get to know them, and sometimes downtime is the key to their success for the rest of the day.
Thank you so much. These are great suggestions. Other panelists, do you want to add any more?
Yeah, I would love to add some stuff. Just to piggyback off of what you said, Rebecca, just to bring in other ways that you can use technology in terms of making, helping a student be prepared for a certain activity. I know Lydia and I did a bunch of this when we worked together, doing video modeling, so you can have a student model a skill that you're trying to teach, whether it's a social skill, or classroom behavior, and then showing the video to the student that you're trying to teach the skill to really allows them to just visually take it in, and it just gives them just another method to learn what it is you're trying to teach them. Also, to prepare a student for an event, so let's say you're going on a field trip or you're trying something new, and maybe there's some anxiety around there. Often a lot of students with autism suffer from extreme anxiety, so whatever you can do to reduce anxiety and really, for all of us, when we're anxious, it's hard to learn. And so when you can reduce anxiety, it just makes you more available to learn. So one way to do that is, let's say you're going on a field trip, maybe show some photos of where you're going to kind of prep the students. So when they get there, they're a little comforted because they've seen the photos of where you're going. I found that strategy has really helped. Also, to reflect on an experience, showing photos to reflect on what you've done also really helps in communicating around that and encouraging language. We all like to see pictures of us and what we've been doing, and I think it just gives them a platform to, again, make the learning visual. social stories, Rebecca talked about that. I think they're awesome. And so I just wanted to put a plug in for that. And then the last point is, Rebecca, I love that you mentioned that study about food and students with autism and how they don't respond the same way internally as we do to praise sometimes. One of the students I'm working with right now, I'm seeing that same thing, and he really loves deep pressure on his body, like lots of taps on his body. And so what I've started to do is when he does something that's awesome, I kind of tap his chest and tap his back and go, oh, that's so awesome. And so what I'm doing is I'm pairing my voice in a really happy way to an experience that makes him feel good. And I'm hoping that then he'll start to feel good when he hears my voice when I don't tap his body. So there can be other things, not just food, but food can be very powerful. And so you just use what you can. So that's all I had to say.
That's great. It sounds like you really have gotten to know those people. Lydia, I think you wanted to add something?
I always want to add something. It's so exciting to hear about what's happening and jog my memory about things that have helped in the past, but also currently. So the kids that I work with now are fully included in the 5th grade. And so one thing that really helps with their self-regulation is the use of bean bags. And what we do is the kids lie between the bean bags, and then an adult or another kid sits on top of them. And so it provides this deep pressure. But bean bags are something that can very easily be part of any classroom, and they can have many different functions. It's just that they're very critical in the 5th grade at Fall Creek this year because that deep pressure is so important. And then other kids who aren't on the spectrum often use the beanbags and sometimes ask for squishes too. So it's become part of the culture of the 5th grade and part of what we have as a universally designed classroom where deep pressure is available to those that need it on a regular basis. Another thing that we use that's just become this universal thing is headphones, and these look really obnoxiously like, oh, this is a kid who receives special services. Look, they're headphones. But we have a whole bin of them, and so all of the kids use these headphones that we happen to get for really, really cheap. And so if you walk into the classroom, there'll be maybe 5 kids wearing these yellow noise-canceling headphones. And so, again, it becomes something that everyone has access to and helps kids to varying degrees. But something that might help one student might also be really helpful to somebody with or without a label. Another thing that we use is a lot of apps. So there's an app called Now What that is a visual app, and it's very reliant on text. The kids that we're working with now are readers. But there are other similar apps out there that have visual schedules that are on the iPad so that it can go with you. And the kids are learning to write in their own schedules, and it will sound off or have a blinking countdown to when the next thing on the schedule is. We also have visual schedules like you're talking about in terms of choose one, and we use dry erase markers all the time. And then this first then can be done in many different ways, but this is what it looks like in 5th grade for one of our students, again with dry erase marker. And then something as simple as lunch can be really complicated. So this is something that one of our students uses with very specific choices, and then the script of what to say to ask for that specific choice when going to the lunchroom. The kids carry around their own bag, so this kid carries this bag around, and what that does is make that child more independent and self-sufficient, but also add some deep pressure as they transition from one place to another. So it's automatically built into their day and their transitions. So I think also using apps for self-regulation, like there's a Gloop-free app that's really, really helpful. You're talking about that downtime, Rebecca, and I think you know, one thing that a lot of kids like to do is use screens, but screens can be helpful in doing some of these sensory applications that help them really self-regulate and self-calm, and that can be helpful when you're someplace like in the auditorium and it's loud, and to get out would be really hard, or on a field trip in the bus and it's scary or loud. So just some other tools.
Great.
Can sorry.
Go ahead.
I really think that's awesome that you have those headphones for so many people in your class, and using those, because that's one of the things that we encounter a lot is when we do things that are different for our students, like the headphones. We have a set that we use with we actually have 2 sets. That kids will ask questions, and I think people are often afraid to try things like that because it makes a student look different. But I think one thing to keep in mind is that kids are, because this school, especially with this school, but with other schools too, are becoming inclusive, and these kids, they're seeing them more. I feel like they're really great about accepting them even and understanding what's going on. A lot of the kids are curious and they'll ask questions, but when you answer their questions, like they're really great about it, and often they'll get like, oh, can I try that? And that's so cool, and you know, and it's great to see that. But I just think that not being afraid to try things, but also not making sure that you explain it to other kids and talk to them about those types of things that you're doing. And then just to piggyback off of something Rebecca said about writing things down, and then Nicole, you were talking about anxieties, and so did you, Rebecca, about how those anxieties can really make it difficult for them to get through parts of their day. I was reading something that a child with autism actually wrote, and they were talking about how when they're trying to come up with a thought, or they want to say something, it's very fleeting, and often, that's why they will repeat phrases a lot, is because thought is there and then it's gone, and so they keep repeating it and trying to grasp onto it. But if you have things written down for them to look at, like the schedule or the first sentence strip or the visual aids that Rebecca was talking about before, it made it easier for them to focus on what they need to, because they now no longer have to try to hold on to that piece of something else that they're thinking about. And it kind of helps them with the focus, because they don't have to think what's next. It's right there, and they can look real quick and move back to what they're doing. So that's been really helpful for us with some of our students. And then just a quick note for people that I think all of us work with autism and these softwares and programs and things all the time. The cards that Rebecca was holding up, the PECs, are made from Boardmaker. And so if people are trying to recreate them, if you know somebody in your school, you can find out somebody that has the program. It makes it super easy to make them. It is an expensive program, though, so if you don't, you can use them and make them with actual pictures or different clips that but Boardmaker is a really excellent program if you get your hands on it. It allows you to do a lot with the social stories and with the PECs. So.
And there's a web-based version of Boardmaker, not made by Boardmaker, that's pretty cheap. So you could sign up for like $3 a month, and it's systematic in similar way to Boardmaker, but it's less of a commitment than the $600 software.
Yeah. What is it?
The name escapes me, but if you go to Amazon and look for Boardmaker, the web version will also pop up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great.
Can I just say one thing real quick?
Please.
Lydia, you used the term universal classroom, and I really like that way of framing it, it's kind of normalizing all different methods used and strategies used to help a child cope and regulate and be successful. And I love that your mindset about it is that it's universal, it's there for everybody. And so that's just the other piece that I wanted to add, is I found in my work that a lot of the strategies I've used with kids with autism also work for other kids and people. So you might find these strategies help in other ways. I just did this on the piece of paper, so it's really sloppy, but I don't know if you can see it. I work with a student who is kind of asking me, are we done yet? Are we done yet? And I wanted to let him know how he could know that we're done yet. So every time we did a certain activity, I told him, I said, we're going to do this many activities. And every time we complete an activity together, and it's just quick and easy. I just made an X in a box. And he knew that once all the boxes were X'd, we're done. And so I think just making something visual so it's quick and easy can be helpful to lots of kids.
Mm-hmm. Look, that's the same thing that's happening here.
Yeah.
We use it all day long.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to two things. One is making it easier for those kids that may be struggling, but also making it an inclusive classroom for the student that may be struggling or that is, working through how they see the world. But for all those kids, as a gen ed classroom teacher, that's a really good strategy to have something up on the board to let all the kids know, some sort of visual agenda. So I think it helps everyone. I know you all have been talking about how you make it this a socially inclusive or a universal classroom. Do you have any other ways that you really address the social inclusive needs of kids and being sure that the students without autism understand what you're doing and why you're doing it? Do you have any strategies for classroom teachers for making that really that universal classroom?
Well, I mean, I can start. It kind of touches on the question that it was originally put out there for me. But guys, jump in because This is awesome. You guys, I love talking about all this. So many great ideas. I have found that just really being very open with kids about how we're all different and we all learn differently and we all have strengths and we all have areas that we need help. And I usually start off by telling kids the things that I'm good at and things that are hard for me. And then I have students in the classroom also kind of share in that conversation. And I make sure that when, if I'm talking specifically, if my target in the conversation is to specifically make sure that we are being inclusive socially in our classroom, kid among kid, and my target is a student that can't talk, I really make sure that I'm representing his or her strengths too. So, because especially if a child is pretty low or is low functioning with autism, there are behaviors that are noticeably very different, and kids notice them. We all notice them. And so it's really important to highlight the strengths that the child is good at doing, because maybe those kids aren't noticing them, and it helps, and especially if some of those strengths can be some similarities for the other kids in the classroom. Like if you have a student that really loves computers or really loves his iPad, make sure you highlight that so kids can start to see where they are the same. So talking about differences, talking about similarities, and how we all learn differently. And I would say things like, in our classroom, everyone gets what they need. And they all don't need the same thing, but everyone gets what they need to learn. And so that's really just setting the stage that, we're all here to learn, and it's going to look different for every kid. So that's just as a beginning. If anybody else wants to jump in.
I think it's important to, I love what you're saying, Nicole. I think it's important to also provide those experiences, like shared experiences. So for example, this also goes with the self-regulation piece. There's a kid that needs deep pressure. So he's figured out how to ask kids for noogies, right? So it's this like very fifth grade boy, like giving kids noogies, and he'll ask for noogie, and he'll ask if other kids want noogies, and then they'll have double noogies. And at first he used his Proloquo, which is like a speech production visual thing on the iPad, app on the iPad for talk. But now he knows how to formulate that sentence based on what he learned from his iPad. So he'll ask these kids for noogies, and he's getting his self-regulation needs taken care of, but he's also building community, and it's through these acts of helping each other that I think true bonds are formed, and true relationships are formed, and true advocacy is formed. So when kids are sitting on each other with beanbags, or giving noogies, or giving head squeezes, or hugs, or high fives, it's getting a lot of needs met at the same time, and it's really, if we expect that as part of our classroom communities, we're building a stronger community for everyone that's in it. Another thing that we do is, there's one kid in particular that's really on fire using Proloquo. I mean, it's just this amazing tool for him. And so every afternoon, he picks someone out of the 5th grade, out of 40-some kids, and everybody wants to hang out with him and talk with him using Proloquo. And one thing that we'll do, and this kind of jumps back to my question of, academic, how do you include academic information or tasks with kids with pretty intensive autism? One thing that this kid will do with another student is look at, this is this solar system book, 5th grade book, and they'll look at some pictures from this book together and come up with sentences. And we actually have a backup iPad that also has Proloquo for backup for this kid, just in case something happens to his device. But in the meantime, that neurotypical kid can use Proloquo to model what it looks like to talk about these images from this grade level text, and then our student with autism comes up with novel sentences based on what he sees from the grade level text. So it's just, again, another way to make community and help kids connect in different ways.
Does that take much training for the other student to use that program with the student, or is that something that seems to sort of flow with the day?
We have so many digital natives these days that we're teaching that Proloquo is pretty intuitive, and as is just basic talking about a picture. So, and again, I'm now speaking from a 5th grade perspective, but for the 4th and 5th graders, there wasn't a lot of direct instruction of, this is how you work with this kid. It's pretty much, hey, look, here's a device. Look what he's doing. Okay, now do that too.
Great.
Can I piggyback on that? I agree with you about using things that like really excite them, especially with the technology. One of the lower tech one that actually I love using for groups is called a Tech Talk. It's got 8 buttons on it, and you can put pictures on the buttons, or you can just make them make sounds or noises or anything. It's really easy for the kids to use. And they love it. It's like the most exciting thing in the world to come to a group and get to push those buttons, and it makes them want to be a part of these groups working with these kids even more. And I agree with you. We found that like they just intuitively know, and a lot of times better than you would even think, or adults will interact with the kid, and I think that's really exciting when they do that. Another thing that we try to do, we actually sat down with our TAs the other day and brainstormed all the positives about our kids and the things that they are really good at, and using those things to create opportunities for them to engage with other students. Like one of our girls is really great at building blocks. She can build towers really high. She even knows like how to stabilize it so she can add more on even when it should have fallen over like 5 blocks ago. So and for other kids to see her doing that, they get excited. So we'll get her, like when I'm in the room, I'll try to get her into that area and kind of like, okay, let's build, like let's do this, and help her even make it even higher, or maybe make a comment to another kid like, oh, look at what she's doing, and drawing them in, and then it all falls over and everybody loves it. And so like taking those strengths and those things that they're really good at that other kids would also enjoy, and helping to build those social interactions can be really positive.
Can I just clarify something really quick?
Yeah.
I like what you said, Rachel. I was going to say the same thing about what were positives, but just for piggybacking off of what Lydia was talking about, just so if there are people out there who don't understand or know, there's something called AAC, which is Augmentative Alternative Communication, and what that really means is anything from low-tech, like the picture exchange program, which is giving a picture of something and in return getting that object or getting what it is that they need, all the way up to using an iPad for programs like Proloquo to Go, which is a text and picture to speech program where you can either type or you can point to a picture, or you can have a sentence already typed out for you. And then there is a voice output from the iPad that is talking to whoever the conversational partner is. So just so everyone knows what that is. A while ago, there was something called a Dynavox, which is still in existence. There's a Dynavox program on iPads, but if anyone had seen children who needed help with communication maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was like a big black box. And it again had text and picture to speech, just so we all understand what the words are that we're talking about, and people who know anything about it wanted to know about it, that's what we're talking about.
And it's something really easy to look up on YouTube. Like, you can see people using Proloquo or some older videos of people using Dynavox on YouTube. It's a great resource.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Let's move in a little bit more to what Lydia was starting to talk about with the academic strengths and needs and differentiation, which is an art for any teacher to work with any student. If you guys would talk a little bit about ways you've ensured students with autism have meaningful access to grade level curriculum. I know you've already talked about a lot of ways, but other ways that you've worked at really curricular based.
So I can start out just by talking about what's happening in the 5th grade, and that is we're doing the expeditionary learning modules that were written for New York State for English language arts. And so these are pretty complex tasks and texts that kids are working on. But what's really great about them is that they're very obvious learning targets that are explicitly explained at the beginning. So what we do as a team, and that the teaching assistants working with these kids are masterful at doing, is figuring out, okay, what's the learning target that is most accessible to this child right now? And let's spend the entire time working on this, even this piece of this one learning target. And so if they're talking about understanding scientific information and looking at bugs in the rainforest, then our students will be looking at nonfiction text and mostly looking at the pictures and talking about the pictures using their devices, using Proloquo or writing sentences. Another great word prediction program for kids that are a little bit more advanced is the WordQ app. So they're using these devices to work on their IEP goals of communication while also using the same texts or pictures and to be working toward parallel tasks or similar tasks or part of a task that their neurotypical peers are working on. Another piece, for example, there were lots of kids sorting out yesterday, opinion versus fact, scraps of paper, and it was maybe 1 or 2 sentences, and they had to figure out if it was a fact or opinion. So what this student did was work on one fact and unpacking what each one of those words in that one fact meant. And then we use Google Images all day, every day, to help there become visuals of these words and what it means to be an insect. Because if you click on insect in Google Images, you have countless images of the interpretation of insect. And so this kid now has this vocabulary of what an insect is. So again, taking a part of the task, making it meaningful, making it relevant, making it connected to the IEP goals, but also being part of what the 5th grade is doing so that there's a connection and they are moving toward more independence and connectivity.
Great. Anyone else want to add pieces to our academic focus?
I can just say that pre-teaching goes a long way. So if you, I know I did a lot of pre-teaching with the math curriculum for first grade. So, if I knew what lessons we're going to be working on in the first grade classroom the following week, I can be helping my student by breaking it down in the way he needs, perhaps the week before, so that when the lesson is being taught in the classroom, he's already kind of got the initial concept and he's better able to be an engaged participant. So I think, and that involves a lot of planning. And as teachers, we do our very best, and sometimes we have lots of planning on board, and sometimes it's a little more fluid. And so when you're in a space to do lots of planning, pre-teaching can be really helpful.
Great.
Can I make a comment about sometimes there are students that you're working with that really the curriculum that is going on in the classroom is not appropriate for them or where they're at and their levels, but that doesn't mean that you can't integrate them in and have them working on a similar task with another student. So for instance, there was the students that were working on ending blank, and we had a student that's working on matching, like he's matching words to words. So we're not going to have him working on ending blends or trying to get him there, but we could create tasks like, for instance, a bingo board where you say a word, the neurotypical kids would be reading the words and trying to find the words that have the ending blends and say them, whereas the other student would be matching just the word to the word. So you would give them the card and they're just matching. So you can create and design tasks that the other student on the same task, but with a different goal and a different focus. And sometimes it's a behavioral thing that is more important than the task at hand as well, that you want to make sure you're getting out of what's going on. So even though you always want them working towards those goals, sometimes where you're at is just not there yet. You can design other opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I know we've been talking a lot about working with the students, and I know that you also have the privilege of working with a lot of different adults as educators, where you alluded to the fact that planning has to happen. It can't happen in a vacuum. You're working with classroom teachers, with related service providers. You were talking about TAs. It can be really powerful for creating some outstanding educational programs for the students, but it can also be tricky. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind just leading us off on a brief discussion of ways to work effectively with the other adults involved in the students' education.
Sure, and I have the unique perspective of being a related service provider. So I also open this up to my teacher in my classroom, Rachel, and of course you guys too, about what your perspective is. There are really I'll speak from the related service provider end of it. I am also in the classroom all day, which is different for me. Usually as a speech-language pathologist from pre-K up to high school, you work with certain students on your caseload. You work with a lot of different teachers. You may have time for team time during the week, you may not. So this is a totally, the atmosphere of being in a team all day for me is totally a new experience for me. So I would have to say first and foremost is clear communication. Insofar as the people who are the main teachers in the classroom, when you're working with, we have 3 TAs. We work with an occupational therapist. We work with a physical therapist who is not from our school district. We work with a music teacher, an adaptive physical education teachers, other general education teachers from different grades. So really say what you mean. Don't imply what you think you mean. Just you've got to be as clear as possible. Working in our team atmosphere, just as like the open doors room, requires not only to have clear and effective communication with your team, but also having realistic expectations of all these other service providers. So you really have to think about where they're coming from too, and all their caseloads for the day and what they have to deal with. And often they don't know what you do, how you do it, or it's really not on their radar. So often sometimes related service providers only focus on their specific area, and they don't think about, say, the communication piece. So they'll come in and they don't think about, okay, well, how is the student communicating with everyone else? So they'll come in and when they're working with your students, you have to inform them, okay, the student is using an iPad for communication, and this is how you use it, and this is what they're going to do. So it's a lot of education on the part of the staff for the classroom that we're in. Don't assume anything. If you want someone to do something, you know, some people take initiative, some people don't. So I think it's really important, if you want someone to do something for your students, you really need to tell them that that's something that you want. Parents, really important not to assume that parents and honestly other professionals that you're working with understand or know anything about autism. So really always asking parents if they have any questions about what you had said, educate parents if you can. Keep them up to date and informed about their children. And the same thing with other professionals in your school. Open it up for staff meetings if anyone has any questions, if anyone has any concerns. Just trying to be as open as possible with all the staff as you can. You know, and as a team member from the other side of it, voice your needs. You know, don't assume that your teacher is going to know how you're thinking or how you're feeling. And you really have to kind of be able to say, like, this is what's going on. I need a break right now. A lot of that goes on. We try and check in with people on how they're feeling and what's going on. It's a very intense situation sometimes during the day. And also, like, the final thing I'll touch upon, and then everybody else can just jump in. And I think this has to do with how everyone can effectively work with your students, is remember the mental age of the students you're working with and adjust your expectations accordingly. And when I say mental age, I mean, you know, all students of all chronological ages have strengths, weaknesses, and everything in between. But especially with students who have some developmental issues, expressively and receptively language-wise, oftentimes, even though chronologically they may be, say, 5 years old, developmentally they're only 2 or 3. And if you can adjust your expectations about that, that can often reduce some stress levels. And again, a lot of teachers and other professionals don't think about mental age. They just think, oh, this student is 5, they should be able to do X, Y, and Z. So that's what I have to say.
I think it's really important, piggybacking on what you said, to have a vision for what you believe this child can achieve. Because it's sometimes hard when a student comes in and it's a new situation and you're seeing all of their worst traits, the loudest screams and the biggest tantrums and the flailing and the knocking over furniture. You know, people around you might say, like, this kid shouldn't be here, this isn't appropriate. This kid needs way more tools than we have to offer. And it's important as an advocate and as an ally to say, I think we can give this a shot. Like, I think this kid has a lot to offer, and this is what I think it'll look like in 3 months. Hang in there. And to be a cheerleader for the team that helps that child get there. And that includes all of those service providers. And so sometimes, you know, as an educator, you might think, oh, I have this, I know exactly where this kid is headed. But you're right, Rachel. Sorry, Rebecca, if you don't have that communication, they don't know what your goals are for this kid or what the team's goals are for this kid, and the steps to get that child to that goal or to that more successful, inclusive situation. So again, having a vision, having really great goals, and then cheerleading folks to help them buy into the steps to reach those goals is just such a critical part of being part of a team. And I only know this because I did it poorly for a long time, and I figured it all out by doing it wrong. And it doesn't mean that I'm perfect now, but I've learned a whole lot about what it's like to be part of a team doing something that's really complex and really hard and really rewarding. But it's a phenomenal journey that hopefully we can all be a part of.
I think that's really great. I think something that is really important to remember is that when we get these big teams, it feels overwhelming a lot. Like you have, like even listening to Rebecca say that list of people, it's a lot of people, but it's also a blessing. Like to have that many people with those many different expertise, like accessing them. I mean, and knowing when you've reached your limits and going to these people and asking them for their expertise, especially parents. Like I think we forget them as experts a lot, but they are experts on their child. Like they know what their child likes and doesn't like, and a lot more about them than we think they know a lot. Even if they don't know a lot about autism, they know their child. So making sure that you remember that it is really great that we have these teams of people working all for one child and creating, like what you said, just an amazing result is great.
Wow. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful discussion. I know that the Ithaca City School District is so lucky to have all of you here. And anyone watching this, whether live or recorded, remember that you can access this from the ICSD Professional Development webpage or from our YouTube channel. If you probably Google the Inclusive Classroom in ICSD, you'll find this video. It is being recorded, so if you want to go back and see what someone referenced before, the name of an article or the name of an app, you can do that. We'll also try and get those resources referenced on our webpage so that you can have a link to some of the research we talked about and some of those apps. So it was a really exciting time to have with you all. I thank you all. Nicole did have to step away, so we thank Nicole, but we thank you, Lydia and Rebecca and Rachel. It's been really informative, and thanks for joining us, and keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.